If you're standing, please sit down. Our Bible reading this evening is 2 Samuel chapter 9. 2 Samuel chapter 9. By all means, look it up in a Bible if you wish, but it's also going to be projected onto the screen. And as I said at the start, I'll be reading from the Christian Standard Bible this evening. 2 Samuel chapter 9. Let me pray again briefly before I read. Father, thank you for your word. Thank you for the scope and the breadth of it. And as we read this chapter now, and then as we think about it together, please impress it upon our hearts and our minds. Help us to feel and to think differently as a result of what we see. And please help us all to be perhaps a bit more mindful of those with additional needs as a result of what we read. Bless us, we pray, in Jesus' name. Amen. 2 Samuel chapter 9, starting at verse 1. David asked, this is King David, "Is there anyone remaining from the family of Saul I can show kindness to for Jonathan's sake?" There was a servant of Saul's family named Ziba. They summoned him to David, and the king said to him, "Are you Ziba?" "I am your servant," he replied. So the king asked, "Is there anyone left of Saul's family that I can show the kindness of God to?" Ziba said to the king, "There is still Jonathan's son who was injured in both feet." The king asked him, "Where is he?" Ziba answered the king, "You'll find him in Lodebar at the house of Machir, son of Ammiel." So King David had him brought from the house of Machir, son of Ammiel in Lodebar. Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, son of Saul, came to David, fell face down, and paid homage. David said, "Mephibosheth." "I am your servant," he replied. "Don't be afraid," David said to him, "since I intend to show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan. I will restore to you all your grandfather Saul's fields, and you will always eat meals at my table." Mephibosheth paid homage and said, "What is your servant that you take an interest in a dead dog like me?" Then the king summoned Saul's attendant Ziba and said to him, "I have given to your master's grandson all that belonged to Saul and his family. You, your sons, and your servants are to work the ground for him, and you are to bring in the crops so your master's grandson will have food to eat. But Mephibosheth, your master's grandson, is always to eat at my table." Now, Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. Ziba said to the king, "Your servant will do all my lord the king commands." So Mephibosheth ate at David's table, just like one of the king's sons. Mephibosheth had a young son whose name was Micah. All those living in Ziba's house were Mephibosheth's servants. However, Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem because he always ate at the king's table. His feet had been injured. Imagine this. A neurodivergent teenager comes into a church youth group. Let's call him George. He's never been before, and he's on high alert as a result. His mum takes him inside, and a leader checks him in from behind a table at the door. The leader points George in the direction he's meant to go, but nobody takes him through. He opens a door into a room which appears to be full of mayhem. 16 other teens are shouting and screaming and running and having fun, which is great. But it's sensory overload, and George needs to sit on his own for a while to be able to cope. At a particular point in the evening, everybody heads off for a talk. Nobody tells George what to do, and he's unable to process what goes on. Eventually, a leader shouts to him across the hall, "What are you sitting there for? It's talk time." George listens to the talk, but soon he starts fidgeting. He finds focus difficult. It's not long before someone turns around and shushes him. Later, there's a song sung with flashing lights and a thudding beat. George feels as though his head is going to explode. When it's discussion time, George tries to take part, but he finds the social interaction really hard. And he feels a fool every time he speaks. Eventually, it's all over. George leaves exhausted. He can't even talk to his mum about it. When she asks if he's going next week, he's not. Imagine this. A neurodivergent teenager comes into a church youth group. Let's call him George. He's never been before, and he's on high alert as a result. His mum takes him inside, and a leader checks him in from behind the table at the door. Before George goes in, the leader at the table has a chat with George and his mum. He asks if there's anything they need to know, and George's mum shares about his neurodiversity. They talk as a three about things which help George and things which he's likely to find quite difficult. The leader needs to check some other customers in, so he goes and he fetches another leader from the main hall. And this second leader runs through exactly what is likely to happen during the session. George knows when it's going to be a bit noisy, and he knows when it's going to be quieter. He understands what's going to happen and when. The second leader then takes George through. He opens a door into what appears to be a room full of mayhem. 16 other teens are charging about, shouting and screaming and having fun, which is great. But George now knows that this is free play. The leader points him to some ear defenders and a quiet space he can use if he just needs a bit of respite. This second leader then approaches one of the other young people in the group, someone who has some experience of neurodiversity. He asks him to have a chat with George, which he does. When talk time comes, that same young person sits with George, and that calms him. He wears the ear defenders during the song, and when it's discussion time, the leader makes it absolutely clear that he doesn't have to say anything, but that he'll be respected if he does want to speak up. Eventually, it's all over. George leaves exhausted, but content, because he has this sense that he's been cared for and looked after. And when his mum asks if he's going to go again next week, well, he thinks he might just do that. This evening, we're having one of our occasional sermons on things we don't normally talk about. We've covered subjects like singleness and same-sex attraction and politics. Tonight, we're looking at what the Bible teaches about additional needs. Now, what do I mean by additional needs? Well, people with additional needs have a condition or a life circumstance which has an effect on their lives. So they may have a physical disability, or neurodiversity, or a learning disability, or a behavioral disorder, and as a result, they require additional or different support. Now, we're going to think widely about all kinds of different additional needs tonight. And to do that, we're going to look at the example of one man from the Bible who had a disability, this man, Mephibosheth. And we're going to learn some brilliant lessons from how a man called David embraced him just as he was. And it's absolutely right that we think about this. You see, according to the UK Disability Equality Charity's scope, about 24% of people living in the UK today have a disability. Now, my guess is that's higher than you would have expected. That equates, they say, to about 16 million people. Many of those with disabilities feel that they encounter frequent small acts of negative behavior all the time. Here's the story of one lady called Jacqueline. Growing up is knowing that you're not accepted and that you are different, and knowing that actually you're not accepted in society. Yes, my family accepted me, but they didn't understand really, and that caused a lot of mental health issues. What's more, in the wake of the government's decision to allow assisted dying, many disability groups in the UK are fearful about the pressure people with disabilities may feel to end their lives prematurely. So in an atmosphere where people with disabilities feel excluded, Doesn't that give the church the opportunity to be different? Doesn't it give us the opportunity to offer a warm embrace to those who often feel rejected? Doesn't it give us the opportunity to give a full, unreserved welcome to those who encounter negative attitudes in their daily lives? So this evening, we're thinking about how we as a church can offer a full welcome to all people and to people with additional needs in particular. Let's allow the word to challenge us. Let's learn together how we can welcome everybody. Let's learn together how we can help people with disabilities want to come to our church meetings and gatherings. And let's learn together that we'll all receive a blessing as we get to know those with additional needs. Because if we do, we may well see people with disabilities coming to Duke Street and maybe even coming to Christ. And we may well enhance our witness in the community as others see how we treat the vulnerable with enormous dignity. The Lord loves to bless those who care for those for whom others do not care. So let's look at Mephibosheth, and we're going to do it in two very simple steps. Step one, David's full welcome. David's full welcome. Let me give you Mephibosheth's background. We first hear of him in 2 Samuel chapter 4, verse 4. He's the son of Jonathan, the grandson of King Saul, the first king of Israel. And this is what we read about him in 2 Samuel 4:4. Saul's son Jonathan had a son whose feet were maimed. He was 5 years old when the report about Saul and Jonathan came from Jezreel, that they died. His nanny picked him up and fled. But as she was hurrying to flee, he fell and became disabled. His name was Mephibosheth. So Mephibosheth has a disability. That wasn't the case from birth. He has this tragic accident as a child when he's dropped and his feet are so hurt that they never recover. Mephibosheth carries his injuries through the rest of his life. Well, he then disappears from the scene for 15 or 20 years. It's difficult to put together a whole chronology of his life. And we next hear about him in 2 Samuel 9, our passage. So let's look at what happens. In verse 1, David takes the initiative. David asked, "Is there anyone remaining from the family of Saul I can show kindness to for Jonathan's sake?" Back in 1 Samuel 20, David had made a covenant of love with Jonathan and his descendants. David remembers that covenant, and he wonders whether there's anyone left from Saul's household to whom he can show kindness. Well, they track down a servant of Saul's called Ziba, and in verse 3, David asks him the same question. So the king asked, "Is there anyone left of Saul's family that I can show the kindness of God to?" Ziba said to the king, "There is still Jonathan's son who was injured in both feet. If there's anyone left from Saul's family, David wants to show kindness to him or her." And for the first time, he hears about Jonathan's son. The first thing he's told about him is that he has a disability. Now, in verses 4 and 5, David summons Mephibosheth, and he comes, no doubt, in great fear and trembling. What would most kings do to the descendants of old rival regimes? Well, it wouldn't be pretty. So Mephibosheth approaches David cautiously in verse 6. Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, son of Saul, came to David, fell face down, and paid homage. David said, "Mephibosheth, I am your servant," he replied. And then comes verse 7. Verse 7 is where we're going to focus the majority of our attention. This is a brilliant verse because it shows David's full welcome. Here it comes. "Don't be afraid," David said to him, "since I intend to show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan. I will restore to you all your grandfather Saul's fields, and you will always eat meals at my table." And they are beautiful words. Remember, the first thing we've been told about Mephibosheth is that he has a disability. Remember that he's the grandson of Saul, David's former adversary who tried repeatedly to hunt him down and kill him. And what does David do? He shows kindness. He shows above and beyond kindness. Far from attacking Mephibosheth, He protects him. He restores to him the entire estate of King Saul, which must have come under David's control. And most lovely of all, David says, "You will always eat meals at my table." And that's important because it's repeated 3 times in the rest of the chapter. Now, when David speaks to Ziba in verse 10, he says, "But Mephibosheth, your master's grandson, is always to eat at my table." In verse 11, it pops up again. So Mephibosheth ate at David's table, just like one of the king's sons. Here it is again in verse 13. "However, Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem because he always ate at the king's table. His feet had been injured." And what's so striking is this: that David virtually adopts Mephibosheth as one of his sons. That's the point of verse 11. So Mephibosheth ate at David's table just like one of the king's sons. So what we're seeing here is that David gives Mephibosheth a full welcome. He has a physical disability. He's the grandson of his old enemy, but he gives him a full welcome. He shows him full kindness. Literally, he shows him chesed, faithful love, loyal love, covenant love. He draws him in. He draws him close. He goes above and beyond to embrace Mephibosheth with his disabilities. Now, what does that mean to us? Now, a couple of years ago, I read these words in the blurb advertising a Bible-centered evangelical conference. It said, "Up to 1 in 5 people in the UK live with a disability. But are 20% of our church families disabled? Why not? For too long, the church has been blind to the needs of some of the most vulnerable and unreached people in the world." And they're not alone in saying that. Jenny has attended a Christian course for parents of children with additional needs recently, and she found that 50% of the families represented had ended up moving churches because they simply didn't feel properly supported. So what do you think of that? Is that fair? Now, are we blind to the needs of some of the most vulnerable and unreached people in the world? Well, as we think about whether we're offering a full welcome to people with additional needs, here is the most important principle. Above all else, we need to treat people with additional needs as individuals. Margaret was saying something along these lines. We need to treat people with additional needs as individuals, because not every type of additional need is the same. And as a result of that, people's needs will vary accordingly. It's just different being blind, being deaf, having autism, having cerebral palsy, having dementia, having a learning disability, having spina bifida, having dyspraxia, having mental illness, having epilepsy, and so on. So if we want people with additional needs to be fully welcomed here, we need above all else to treat them as individuals, to get to know them, to learn best from them how to support them. We need to be like Jesus, who when he met that paralyzed man in Luke 5, called him friend. And you could do that, couldn't you? It might take a bit of effort and creative thinking and discussion, but you could do it. And it's worth it. Treat people with additional needs as individuals. Maybe, though, there are some simple things we could do as a church to extend a full welcome to people with additional needs, to show the sort of kindness which David shows to Mephibosheth. Why not think about the difficulties faced by those who are partially sighted? Do we have enough large print Bibles to go around? Are the words on the screen big enough? Are the color combinations on the screen readable? Are steps and bumps marked appropriately? Why not think about the difficulties faced by deaf people? Would anyone want to learn sign language here so that we can sign our services? I think that used to happen years ago. When people speak at the front, do we need to slow down a bit so that those who have difficulties hearing can keep up with them? Why not think about those who struggle with loud noises? Could we buy a bunch of ear defenders for people who struggle with the volume of the music or the booming of some of our voices when amplified? Do we need a quiet space somewhere in the church for those overwhelmed by sensory input? Is our children's and youth work fully accessible to those who have additional needs? Are there alternatives to physical activities for those who can't get around so well? Are we looking after and befriending our young people who are neurodivergent in the right way? What if some people come in and start to disturb our services a bit? If people with learning disabilities come in, or those struggling with their mental health, they might not be as quiet as pretty much all of you are being at the moment. And that's fine. Let's not push people into a corner. Let's not get stressed if people call out at awkward times. It's an absolute myth that we can only worship God if it's all calm and quiet. Talk to people in those circumstances after the service and get to know them. Offer a full welcome. I've seen brilliant examples of that happening over the years. Let's think carefully about the language we use. When we're singing here, we aim to say, "If you're able, please stand to sing the next hymn." That's so much more sympathetic to those in the congregation who simply can't stand. After we've sung, we aim to say, "If you're standing, please sit down," rather than "please take your seats." For someone who has autism, the idea of taking a seat might be quite confusing. We aspire never to use illustrations about bodies or minds which might make those with additional needs feel that they're in some way incomplete or no good. Why not think about physical accessibility? Margaret's touched on that as well. If someone comes in a wheelchair, well, ask him or her where they want to sit. Don't just make room at the back, which would make seeing the screen impossible. Can people with limited mobility access all areas of the building? Do we have toilets which are suitable for all sorts of disability? Is it possible for someone in a wheelchair to get onto the church platform here? A couple of years ago, I spoke to an accessibility lead of an evangelical Anglican church in Kent. And her testimony was this. When the church there started to get serious about additional needs, when they started to get serious about showing a full welcome to those with disabilities, when they started to show David-like kindness to all, well, then people with additional needs started to turn up. Many people with disabilities are longing for community. And that church have found that they've had great opportunities for the gospel through what they're doing. So what about us? Are we up for that? Is there more we could do? Are we like David? Are we offering a full welcome to those with additional needs? Because in the end, if we're not going to be guilty of favoritism, we should embrace people, all people. We should go the extra mile. We should put in the time and the sacrifice involved in being properly accessible. Sisters and brothers, let's do everything we possibly can to make people with disabilities and other additional needs feel an essential, integral part of the church body. Because actually, we are all missing out if we don't do that. David extended a full welcome to Mephibosheth. That's a real challenge. But David's full welcome only makes sense in the light of another welcome which we read about in 2 Samuel 9. So we're moving on, secondly, to God's full welcome. God's full welcome. I want to take you back to verse 3. Listen carefully to the words of David. So the king asked, "Is there anyone left of Saul's family that I can show the kindness of God to?" Ziba said to the king, "There is still Jonathan's son who was injured in both feet." Now, David uses a really striking phrase there in verse 3. He wants to show kindness to any members of Saul's family who are still alive, But he says that he wants to show the kindness of God to them. The kindness of God. And what does that mean? It means, quite simply, he wants to show Mephibosheth kindness which reflects God's kindness. He wants to show Mephibosheth kindness which flows from God's kindness. He wants to show him a God-like, God-originating kindness. And that matters. You see, we will never truly show Christ-like kindness to others if we do not first appreciate God's kindness to us. We will never truly show Christ-like kindness to people with additional needs if we don't first appreciate God's kindness to us. We will never give a full welcome to others if we don't worship God for the full welcome he's given to us. You see, in a spiritual sense, we are the Lord's Mephibosheths. The UK government's current definition of disability is it's if you have a physical or mental impairment that has a substantial and long-term negative effect on your ability to do normal daily activities. Well, before the Lord, we have a spiritual impairment that has both substantial and long-term negative effects on us. That impairment is called sin. And because we're sinners, we reject God and we rebel against him and we offend him and we make ourselves his enemies. And yet, even though we're like that by nature, the Lord is still willing to welcome us. And he's willing to give us a full welcome. Just as David received Mephibosheth as though he were one of his sons, so the Lord is willing to adopt us as his sons and daughters. Despite our sin, despite our being his enemies, he's willing to welcome us to the full. He's willing to adopt us. Please listen to John chapter 1, verses 12 and 13. These are staggering verses written about Jesus 1900 odd years ago. But to all who did receive Jesus, he gave them the right to be children of God, to those who believe in his name, who were born not of natural descent or of the will of the flesh or of the will of man, but of God. And that is staggering. Jesus Christ came into the world. He died on the cross in acute agony to deal with the problem of our sin. He rose from the dead fully vindicated. And those who receive him, those who believe in him, they become children of God. And that is almost unbelievable. David received Mephibosheth as though he were one of his sons. But when we trust in his crucified and risen son, God actually receives us as his sons and daughters. It's the fullest welcome in the universe. He actually makes us his children. And that is stupendous. If you are a Christian here this evening, you're not just right with God. You're not just part of his kingdom. You're not just forgiven. You're not just his friend. You're not just reconciled to him. You are his daughter. You are his son. He's adopted you. He didn't have to do that, but he has, because in his infinite grace, he wanted to show you the fullest welcome imaginable. That's a truth I can hardly get over, but why would I want to? Shouldn't we worship God for the full welcome he's given us in Christ? And his full welcome has two implications for us, I think. First, if you have never come to Jesus Christ, please come now. Imagine you're at an airport and you're returning home from 3 years abroad and you haven't seen your mum for the whole of that time. You go through passport control, you pick up your bags from those whirligig things, you go out into arrivals, and there she is with her arms wide open in welcome, waiting for you to come to her. Metaphorically, God stands with arms open wide, ready to welcome all who come to him. He's ready to forgive, to embrace, to adopt all who come. So if you haven't, come. Confess your wrongdoing to him. Turn from it to live for him. Believe in Jesus Christ. He will give you the fullest welcome you have ever experienced. Why not come to him now? Why turn your back on a welcome like this? Come to Jesus Christ now. But then the second implication of God's full welcome is that it should make us reach out to others in kindness. We've been thinking about showing kindness to those with additional needs in particular this evening, but as I said earlier, we will never show Christ-like kindness to others if we don't fully appreciate God's kindness to us first. And we will never show Christ-like kindness to those with additional needs if we don't first appreciate God's kindness to us. We won't give a full welcome to others if we don't worship God for the full welcome he's given to us. So please, think about the extreme kindness of God to you, and let that drive you to show kindness to all, and to those with additional needs in particular. Because in the end, that is God-like. Listen again to Micah chapter 4, verses 6 and 7. Now, foretelling what will happen in the last days, God says, on that day, this is the Lord's declaration, I will assemble the disabled and gather the scattered, those I've injured. I will make the disabled into a remnant, those far removed into a strong nation. Then the Lord will reign over them in Mount Zion from this time on and forever. He cares about people with disabilities, and he gathers them to himself. So what could we be doing here as a church? As we reflect together on God's kindness, maybe you're feeling yourself moved to want to do something more. Maybe you'd just like to explore possibilities. Maybe you'd like to learn sign language. Maybe you'd like to befriend someone with additional needs. Maybe you'd like to volunteer to show practical support to somebody with a disability. Maybe you'd like to buy some ear defenders or some large print Bibles or some Braille Bibles. Maybe you have ideas that would help people to feel fully included in the children's and youth work or some other ministry in church life. Maybe you could offer to help a child with additional needs in Rock Solid so that they have one-to-one support. But if that's you, well, why not send me an email or a message? If there's a few of us, maybe we'll have a little Zoom together and talk about what might be possible. But even if that isn't for you just now, well, why not reflect on God's kindness? And why not let that motivate you to show a full welcome to those you know who need it? Well, we're going to leave it there. 2 Samuel 9 is not the end of Mephibosheth's story. In chapter 16 of 2 Samuel, he gets totally betrayed by Ziva, something which I think does show the vulnerability of some people with disabilities. Things more or less get put right in 2 Samuel 19, happily. But as we head off into another week, please remember David's full welcome. Please remember God's full welcome. And then extend a full welcome to anyone you meet yourself. Let's think about that for a moment, and then we'll sing our last song.